Come here. I was going to ask you two questions. The first question was going to be the toughest time in your life, but I think we perhaps have touched on that.
Yes, of course. Yeah, that was the first time, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Losing my mum at 15. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Okay. You've clearly survived, and I'm 100% sure she'd be dead proud of you in this moment. A highlight in your life, a moment in your life where you thought, Fiona Dowd, Fiona Jordan, go
Yeah.
girl.
Um, well, now that you've touched on my mum again, what I'm going to say is when I was in school in Manor House, in public speaking class, Colin, imagine, I wasn't a natural public speaker. I was quietly spoken, and I think you could say I was shy. I had a copy for public speaking, and this particular work that we were doing with this teacher was copy-based work, and I got an A plus. So I brought it home to my mother and I showed her, and she was so proud of me, right? But she wasn't proud because of the A plus. She was proud because having a shy, quiet daughter, she knew what it would have taken to overcome to get that A plus. So
Hello there and welcome to another Coffee with Colm, and thanks indeed for joining me. I'm delighted to tell you that this morning we have a friend of mine from the Professional Speaking Association, a friend and colleague, Fiona Dowd, and she's here to join us. So Fiona, pop in, cheers us with your coffee mug, say hi.
I will. Cheers, good morning. It says best mum ever.
I love it.
One of those Mother's Day presents, you know.
Very nice, good stuff. I'm sure. How many children, by the way? Now there's an interesting question straight off the bat.
Two, a boy and a girl.
Aged?
5 and 8.
All right, you're only starting out. You're a young one. All right, good stuff. So come
Yeah,
here.
my youngest just started school.
Great stuff. Well, it's good to have you here. Thanks indeed for taking time out of your busy schedule to have a chat.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us, Fiona Dowd, where are you based? What are you doing these days?
I'm based in Drumcondra, but online, so everywhere. And at the moment, I'm facilitating a leadership course for women out in Ronanstown in Clondalkin. So I often pop back there to the Women's Collective of Ireland and facilitate different groups with them, which I absolutely love. I'm totally aligned with the values of that company. So if they have something on and they want me there, I'm there. So I'm running that at the moment, and online, and I do one-to-one coaching. And I'm a qualified coach.
Qualified,
I also
qualified coach in what, Fiona?
I'm personal development coach. Yeah, that's the title I've settled on. I've played around a little bit with that, but when it comes down to it, I think it's personal development is really what it is.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm always curious when I have a guest on Coffee with Colm as to what led people to the work they're doing today. I reckon there's always a thread that we can unravel back. So are you happy to go with your early years, childhood, school years, etc.? Tell us more.
Yeah, there is a massive thread to unravel from back then. And I suppose I had a wonderful childhood. I had lovely creative expression growing up in the 80s. I went to a Catholic school for girls. It was one of these destination schools. I used to hop on the train or the 29A to get there. It was in Raheny. I was from Donamead. So my older sister had gone there, and then myself. And everything was going swimmingly. I'm from a family of 5, so I have twin brothers and I have an older sister. So there's actually a 10-year gap between us, and then I have a younger sister as well. So lovely, busy household. And actually, as having those older siblings, it was almost like having extra parents. You know, there was a lot of love there, and it was really nice growing up. Unfortunately, when I was 15, my mother passed away tragically. So when you think of what is people's, I think of it like a jigsaw puzzle piece. You know, everyone has that one piece that if it's missing, you don't really get the sense of them. And if you're missing a piece of information from the outside of the puzzle, you can put it together and you can get the sense of who the person is. But when it's a big piece like that, right in the center, I think it makes you understand who they are. And as you say, you can thread things back then to that. So it really threads back to that for me,
Wow.
that when I was 15, yeah, that happened. Yeah.
Well, I'm terribly sorry for your loss. I didn't know that, Fiona, even though, and even that point is interesting where we meet people and we take them as they are in the moment when we meet them and we don't know their backstory. I'm really sorry to hear that. But as you said, it forms. That was a lovely analogy, by the way. The jigsaw. If you're missing a piece from the outside, you can get sets the picture from missing a big piece in the middle. There's a hole. Donamead. I grew up on Tonleague Road, around the corner.
Not too far away, yeah.
Which is
No,
very right.
nice, true and true.
What school was it in Raheny?
Manor House, of course.
Of course, of course.
And Scolania before that.
I went to St. Paul's College in Raheny as a young fella, and we were twinned with Manor House.
Yes.
Did all of our stuff together, tours and trips and sing out stuff and all the rest. It was great time, great time. Of course, you grew up in the 80s, I grew up in the 70s, so I'm well ahead of you. Come here, yeah, sorry for your loss there. And your family, you said there's a 10-year gap. Is that 10 years top to bottom?
There's a 10-year gap between me and my twin brothers, and then a 2-year between them and the older sister.
Oh, I see. Oh, so you're the baby, are you?
No, I've one younger sister.
Oh,
So
sorry, I missed that. Yeah, yes.
yeah,
Great. Okay, good stuff. And so the loss of your mum back then, obviously critical time in your life, 15, young one.
yeah.
What happened thereafter? Did you go to college? Did you go into the workplace after
I
school?
did go to college, yeah, and yeah, just to say, my mum died of suicide, so it was very tragic, and it was at a time where people didn't talk about mental health. I know the theme of your this series of interviews is about mental health. So yeah, people didn't talk about it. There wasn't counselling or anything like that. My dad is a wonderful person, and he strived to keep a happy home. He's a very positive individual and a very kind man, and I was very lucky to have him there. However, we didn't talk about things. So there was a lot of numbing involved, like many people will experience that through their lives. And just trying to understand it, why that would happen, and asking the bigger questions. Like at 15, I was asking philosophical questions that most adults don't even ever think of asking themselves, So that's how I got into an interest in psychology and human behavior. And it all makes sense when you see the way my life unraveled then, so studying and education was a key solid foundation in my life. It's something I grasped onto. And actually in the Leaving Cert, the book Soundings is a poetry book. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but many people listening probably will be. I still have my copy, and there was a poem in that I really clung to that helped me through that. And it was Thomas Kinsella, and there's one line in it in particular, and it's trees hacked clean for better bearing. So, yeah.
That's a beautiful line.
Isn't it?
Trees hacked clean for better bearing.
Yeah, and I never, ever forgot it. And so what it meant to me was when you go through these really tough, hard challenges, that you can come back stronger and you can make sense of it, and there can be more. You can add more, That's the kind of thinking I had, but I didn't know how I was going to do that back then as a teenager. So just stuck with the education, just kept following that thread through my life, and eventually got to a point where the purpose that I'm living now is completely relevant to that experience I had back then.
Wow. Well, first of all, thanks for sharing so openly and honestly. Your mom's name?
Mary.
Mary. And your dad?
Paddy.
Mary and Paddy. Classic Irish names.
Yes.
Classic Irish names. Beautiful.
And actually my maiden name is Jordan, and I called my first son Jordan. Yeah, because I thought if I was taking my husband's name, I thought, well, our firstborn can be Jordan, so I'm not quite losing my name. And he was cool with that because he was a basketball fan, so the tick.
He wove his own story into that. I love it. A beautiful nod back to the family. Well done, you. But yeah, thanks, as I say, for sharing. I believe if people are open to sharing their vulnerabilities, well, then somebody else out there listening, we've no idea who or where this podcast will find somebody, but somebody needs to hear your story because they're experiencing something currently, perhaps unresolved, that they can say, well, okay, Fiona survived it. I'll be okay.
Exactly.
So thanks indeed for that. So college, what did you do after school? Where did you go? What did you study?
I studied journalism because I loved writing, and I absolutely loved that. I didn't get enough points, unfortunately. There were like 540 points at the time. That was the system we were working off. So I went down the route of PLC. So I studied journalism in Closh in Coolock, and waited and waited on that bus, and then three would come along, the number 17, I think it was, to get out there. And yeah, really enjoyed that experience. And after it was done, it was like, okay, I need to work now. So I got working not in journalism, but just to, pay bills and start working basically. Um, I did that for a while, and then I found myself in Hunt Jewelers in Stephen's Green, which is actually gone now. And I got to the stage of being assistant manager, but the manager was the owner's son. And I thought, okay, this is as far as I can go. Do you know what? Let me go back to university, because the college I was in had a link with the University of Bedfordshire, which was called University of Luton. And it meant that I could do a media production degree over there. So I decided then and there, right, that's the route I'm going to take. And I got into that course. They do a major and a minor subject at the time. So I chose psychology with media production, which is basically journalism subjects. So
Um,
packed it and went over there.
interesting. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I have to assume the University of Bedfordshire, or Luton, as you say, at the time, it wasn't online back in the day. Had you to travel? Were you over there?
Oh gosh, yeah. I was over there for 2.5 years. Yeah.
Any
So I used to
millennials?
get my flight, my Ryanair flight, fantastic value. And because it was Luton Airport, it wasn't busy. I could see my case straight away, grab my case, hop in the black cab, and wasn't too far from campus. And then once I kind of went into campus, into this like university bubble,
Um,
for two years. Yeah. And then I stayed on afterwards,
it's really
outside
interesting.
of the bubble, let's say.
What was that?
I stayed on afterwards for about half a year outside of the bubble of
Okay.
university. Yeah.
Okay, very good. And why was that? Because you felt comfortable at home?
No, I mean, after my studying over there, I said I gave myself a set amount of time to find suitable work there.
Okay.
And yeah, I was outside of the bubble, and it was quite lonely. It was quite lonely. I think Irish people, they get quite lonely in London and
Yeah.
the greater area of London.
Yeah. Interesting. Did you
Yeah.
did you hook up with the Irish diaspora over there while you were there?
Not at all. No. When I was studying, there were people from all over the world I gravitated towards. I had a real eclectic mix of friends on different courses, and one by one they all returned to their home countries. So then when the college was over, it was challenging. It was challenging, yeah.
Again, beautiful honesty there, right there. And I repeat, somebody out there is listening to this thinking, that's me, or
Oh
that
yeah,
was me.
absolutely. Yeah.
Come here. I'm smiling as well. The millennials. I'm thinking of my son who lives in London now, but he's living in a vastly different world to the world you and I grew up in.
Yeah.
In that it's fully connected. He'll
Yes, we weren't connected. I was making phone calls home with the pips, and I got these cards and the newsagent. I think I got ripped off a couple of times, and they'd say they were for so many minutes, and then before you know it, you're hearing the pips. I mean, that was life. And I mean, we didn't have this, we didn't have Zoom. There wasn't that connection, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And the loneliness is real. Loneliness is real, and they often say that the loneliest place one can find themselves is in a big city. So
Yeah,
yeah, so well done you
absolutely.
for handling it. I'm curious about your choice of career journalism because you liked writing, led you to jewellery, and very different. Assistant manager. I love the idea that you identified that promotion by death was the only way this thing was going to grow. And so you went back to college and you took on media studies, if I'm not mistaken, media production, and
Yeah.
you minored in psychology. Now that's a very interesting mix right there.
It really is, Colm. And at the time, people used to say to me, why are you doing psychology with journalism? No one's doing that. Like, and to me, it just, I couldn't understand their perspective because to me, it made perfect sense. If I'm going to be like interviewing people, if I'm going to be learning about human, like it's literally human behavior as being a journalist. So to me, they go hand in hand. And at the time, it was I had a wonderful psychology, let's call him professor. Sounds grand, doesn't it? And he really was brilliant. He showed us another side of human behavior that we wouldn't have been exposed to in our everyday lives. He showed us videos from inside prisons and things like that, and it was just fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I always remember those classes. I ended up enjoying psychology more so than, say, the technical side of media production, but I loved. So if you combine the writing and the people connection with the psychology, it makes perfect sense.
It does make perfect sense, particularly against what you shared earlier about your
Yeah,
background and
yeah.
losing your mother at such a tender age. Makes perfect sense. And where after that, by the way, that was a lovely nod to your former, as you say, let's call him professor. That's lovely. Well done. And that also reminds me of we've no idea the impact we're having on people as we live our lives, right? But there's somebody out there watching you today and they're taking their kudos from you. Somebody perhaps watching me. Everybody's being watched by somebody, and we're having an impact for better or for worse. So well done you. Come here. Yeah, after that period, after staying 6 months out of the bubble, did you come back? What happened next?
Dude, I came back. Yeah, and I had to just admit, right, journalism was at the time it was who you know, and it was a case of working in internship and things like that, which I just wasn't in a position to do. I had taken 4 years out of my life to invest in this education, and it was a heavy investment when you think of going to the UK at the time as well. It was a huge financial investment. So I just wasn't in a position to work for free. I had to start, working and thinking about what I was going to do. So I retrained down in Foss and Baldoyle on a multimedia course, which was, yeah, it's all about computers and, practical skills like that. And then through that, I started temping. Well, I had worked, by the way, while I was in college. Within 2 weeks of moving to the UK, I had a job in a jeweller's actually over there part-time. And I also was a hall supporter, which gave me a discount on my accommodation in the campus. So I was working while I was over there, doing little bits, to fund myself. So yeah, the jewellery connection helped for those part-time jobs over there. Yeah, so I studied in Foss, and then and I worked in EasyJet, I should say, over there as well, which was fun. But anyway, when I came back, I continued with the temping after that course, and I got a job in a college, in administration. And now that was a big move. And around the same time, I met my husband to be, um, and I was there in that position for about 9 years.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
lengthy
So
that's a lengthy enough stint given
yeah,
what you did prior to that 9 years.
yeah.
Well, lots in there. Did you say hall supporter? Is that what you used?
I was a hall supporter, Colm,
What's
and
what?
it was so funny because if you're in campus and they have these dorms, these blocks of student accommodation. So if a fire alarm went off in the middle of the night, I'd be the one to be called. My number would be plastered on the kitchen window. And if there was any kind of emergency like that, they would call the hall supporter who was on duty that night.
That's
And so lots of interesting, colourful things went on there. But the interview was so funny because, you know, I said about my brother was trained to be a firefighter, and I'd learned from him, and he's actually a soldier, but he was at the time he was trying to become a firefighter, and yeah, it was just so funny because calm exterior that I was portraying was perhaps not my initial reaction when those fire alarms did go off, you know. But
I love it. I love it. I love it. My mother, God rest her, would call that a white lie. And sure, white lies are grand. Yeah, he brushed past a fireman once, therefore he's you know, trained firefighter, and that rubbed off on you and gave you the credentials to be a hall supporter. And by the way, folks, ladies and gentlemen, one thing I've noticed about Zoom is we're all the same height in Zoom, right? All of us. But when we meet in real life, it's often very different. And this lady here in front of us is diminutive, right? And so I'm imagining the fire alarm ringing and she's going banging pots and pans or whatever to get people up out of their beds. And I'd say they listen to you, Fiona.
oh yeah, it was good experience in voice projection.
First, fabulous story, fabulous story. And you met your husband to be when you were back doing your 9-year stint in university. Is that right? In administration.
Just before I just got in that position, yeah. It was funny when I left the UK. I actually said, Colm, the next man I meet, I'm going to marry, and he's going to have red hair and freckles. I was like, right, that's it.
Wow. Does does he know that before we
Oh,
put
he knows.
this
Yeah, he
podcast?
knows that. Yeah, he knows that. Yeah.
Right. So you manifested him back in the day.
I pretty much did, yeah, but I didn't go out hunting for him. He found me.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I believe in manifestation, you know, and so I like what you said there. He found me, despite you deciding what
Yeah.
he what he looked like and all the rest of it. Well, great story, great story. And come here. So the work you're doing today, right? There is that thread that we spoke about at the start, albeit somewhat weaving, you know, through jewellery and journalism and media production.
Jewelry insurance.
um,
It's the people connection, you know, in retail, you know, that's what it is. It's those conversations and it's human behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to work with Bewley's for years, and I remember when I started in Bewley's back in the 80s, I think it was. You were only a young one, and I remember thinking it was all about coffee and brown bread and breakfast, and I realized very quickly it's just all about people. That's all. Everything's just all about people. So what led you specifically to the work you do now? What happened between the administration job in the college and the
Yeah.
work you're doing today?
Well, for me, when you have a purpose, it's calling you, right? And if you get clear and listen to it, it can guide you, okay? But if you choose to ignore it or push it down or numb it, as some people do, it just gets louder. And as the years go on, it'll find its way through to you, you know. So it's like that squiggly line to where we're going to end up, you know, all those different paths that we take. Eventually, if you're listening to your purpose and you're trying those different paths, eventually you'll get there, you know. And that's what happened with me because, you know, since that trees hacked clean for better bearing, since that realization back then and from my own personal experience and interest in human behavior, everything linked back together and it all makes sense in the end, you know.
It sure does in the end. But again, sort of wise words, young lady. Wise words, you know, not every 15-year-old experienced what you experienced. Not every 15-year-old was asking philosophical questions back then. Not every Leaving Cert student has taken a favorite line from a poem. Trees hacked clean for better bearing. Beautiful, beautiful line. And it trips off your tongue so easily. So you've obviously embodied it, embraced it. I do loved what you said. Loved what you said about if there's a calling, and I believe we all have a calling. Some people choose to ignore, push it down, or numb it. That was an interesting phrase. I have a sense that people who struggle with addiction alcohol or drugs or sex or whatever it might be. I have a sense that that they are just being called to do something, and it's their way of numbing that calling. They're perhaps afraid. Now that's terribly general of me to say, but it's just something that I've considered over the years. That it's a deep self-loathing because they know there's something more they should be doing, and they're choosing to ignore it or push it down or numb it.
Can I just say something there? I think if you overcome things, so if you've gone through terrible things in your life, and if you've overcome them, that's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Safety first, you need your own security first before you can work towards purpose. So if those things aren't met, you can't go that extra mile and work towards your purpose, because you need to function as a human being. You need to survive first before you can elevate towards self-actualization, and that's what it is. And working towards your purpose is working towards self-actualization. It's doing what you're called to do here, and that's what I'd say about that. But in terms of numbing, people can do it out of boredom and lack of purpose, as well as all the other reasons, But I think if personally, my business is called the Legacy Coach. The reason legacy is so important to me is because it's hugely connected to purpose. I don't think there's a bigger purpose than legacy, really. And if you can connect with that, so if you can connect with where you've come from, what are the belief systems you've come from, and decipher them and say, right, which are mine, which can I leave behind from, parental or mentors or however you've been raised, and then decipher it and hold true to your own, and then start forging your own legacy. It'll drive your purpose. The two are very linked, in my opinion. And that's why I call the business the Legacy Coach, because if you can connect with that legacy, it's a huge momentum. It can drive you forward from literally from your ancestors.
Mm.
And you can forge your own path, and then consider the next generation coming along and be ready to pass the baton to them, So that's what it's all about. It's moving in a forward direction and getting quiet and listening to what your purpose is. But first, before you can do that work, you have to come through the levels of, and it's personal development, That's why I call myself a personal development coach as well, because that's what it comes down to. And if you can work on yourself, then you can work on your business, and the business, it'll have a knock-on effect for everything in your life, relationships, business, everything.
Well, you've thought it through. You've thought it through.
I'm slightly obsessed with the notion, yeah.
Well, that's good. That's good. That's good. Obsession is passion. Come here. Love that purpose and legacy, and they're interlinked. And you also touched on something which I think is important. We were all we were all born into certain set of circumstances. You and I happen to have been born in the north side of Dublin, right?
Yes.
Huh?
Lucky us.
Lucky us, lucky us. And, I said on a previous podcast that religion, in my opinion, is initially geographically based. I happened to be born to parents who were married, who loved each other. He worked outside the home. She didn't. They were Catholic. What chance did I have? Right? I wasn't likely to be Muslim, in an instant. And, there's nothing negative in that comment whatsoever. But if I was born in Baghdad, in 1963, my life would be very different. So we are a product of that initial environment, all of us. What's interesting that you touched on is if there's a negative trait running through a family line, whatever that might be, right? It can be broken. It can be identified by somebody in the family line and say, right, enough, whatever that is, enough. It stops here, and you've got your children that you're leaving a legacy through them, and they will emulate, mom and dad in their upbringing. But you've identified, which I think is rare enough, you've identified some stuff that you want to pass on, perhaps some stuff that you want to stop with you. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And in that, I would say if you don't have children, it's still, legacy is still huge because, like you say, everyone is watching. Not everyone is watching. Somebody is watching. Somebody is looking to you, and somebody needs you to make your mark, to make an impact, and to get to that stage where your purpose and your message is out there in the world. Because it could be a neighbor, it could be your community, it could be your professional environment, it could be other wider family members that are looking to you. So just to make that point as well.
Well said, well said. Kids in school in America these days, when asked what career they want in the future, the most popular answer is influencer, right? And what you've just identified here is we're all influencers, whether we like it or not. For better or for worse, we're all influencers. There's somebody watching from the shadows and emulating whatever it is you do or I do or anybody who's listening does or doesn't do. So we are actually all influencers. We just don't get paid the big bucks, you see. Come here. I was going to ask you two questions. The first question was going to be the toughest time in your life, but I think we perhaps have touched on that.
Yes, of course. Yeah, that was the first time, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Losing my mum at 15.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, okay. You've clearly survived, and I'm 100% sure she'd be dead proud of you in this moment. A highlight in your life, a moment in your life where you thought, Fiona Dowd, Fiona Jordan, go girl.
Well, now that you've touched on my mum again, what I'm going to say is when I was in school in Manor House, in public speaking class, Colm, imagine, I wasn't a natural public speaker. I was quietly spoken, and I think you could say I was shy. I had a copy for public speaking, and this particular work that we were doing with this teacher was copy-based work, and I got an A+. So I brought it home to my mother and I showed her, and she was so proud of me, right? But she wasn't proud because of the A+. She was proud because having a shy, quiet daughter, she knew what it would have taken to overcome to get that A+, okay? So I didn't have the heart to tell her that it was copy-based. You know, it wasn't for standing up necessarily in front of everybody speaking. But I always remembered that. So I suppose I set a vow to become a public speaker. And you're talking about a proud moment when I did the 262 talk, which is a project, an empowerment project for women that I've become involved in recently. And when I stepped on the stage and really connected with that audience and the energy and the vibe, and one of our PSA colleagues captured a great image of me with a fist in the air, celebrating with the crowd. I think that, is the moment.
Wow, 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 wow. Mary's definitely proud and was definitely proud on that day. Come here, congratulations and thanks indeed for popping on and having a coffee.
Thank you so much for having me.
Stay where you are. You're going to get the last word if that's okay. Let me just wrap this up, but stay where you are. So folks, there you have. Wasn't that powerful? Wasn't that powerful? Thanks indeed for being part of Coffee with Colm and joining us today. I hope and trust you got something from today. I'm sure you did. Please consider what's been shared here today and apply it into your thinking for this next week. And then come back next week and we'll have another coffee together and we'll share some moments with other people and learn some more stories and talk about mental resilience in today's crazy world. In the meantime, get some great coffee for sure. Get some fresh air. Get some R&R. If you spend too much time alone, please go out and meet some other people. If you spend too much time with other people, please take some time out and get to know yourself a little bit and give yourself a break. And then when the time is right, and only when the time is right, get your head back in the game, get organized for the week ahead, get stuck in, make next week count. And I'll see you here this time next week for another Coffee with Colm. But Fiona Dowd, last word to you.
Live the legacy you want to leave. Be intentional about it because we're all leaving a legacy anyway. You might as well be intentional about it.